In the summer of 1944, the war wasn't over yet. American soldiers were still dying on the beaches of Normandy. The Pacific was still on fire. Tokyo hadn't fallen. Berlin hadn't fallen. The outcome was not yet certain. And yet, in a resort hotel in rural New Hampshire, American diplomats were already designing the world that would come after. Not planning for the peace, not hoping for stability, designing it. Deciding, in granular detail, what the rules of the global economy would be, who would write them, who would enforce them, and, most importantly, who would benefit most from them. The conference was called Bretton Woods. And what was decided in those rooms over 3 weeks in July 1944 was, without exaggeration, the most consequential act of statecraft in modern history. It didn't make the front pages the way D-Day did. No famous photographs, no dramatic speeches. Just economists and diplomats arguing over exchange rates in a mountain resort while the world was still burning. But here's what they actually did. They built a cage, an invisible cage, elegant, almost beautiful in its construction, designed to make American economic dominance not just possible, but structurally inevitable. A system so well engineered that even America's enemies would have to operate inside it to survive. We don't call it a cage, of course. We call it the international order. The rules-based system, globalization. But if you trace the wiring all the way back, every wire leads to the same place, Washington. This is the story of the blueprint, not the guns, not the carriers, the blueprint. The most sophisticated geopolitical engineering project in human history. And why, 80 years later, it is still running, bending under pressure, absorbing challenges but not breaking. Not yet. To understand how America built its geopolitical architecture, you have to understand the world it replaced. Before 1945, the dominant organizing principle of global power was simple and brutal. Empires, territory, colonies. The British Empire controlled a quarter of the Earth's land surface. The French, the Dutch, the Belgians carved up continents between them. Power meant possession. Possession meant extraction. America looked at this system and saw an opportunity, not to conquer land. The United States had plenty, but to design something far more durable, far more profitable, and far more difficult to challenge than an empire of territory, an empire of rules. Here is the core insight that separates American geopolitical strategy from everything that came before it. You don't need to own a country to control it. You need it to depend on a system that you control. And if you design that system well enough, they will defend it for you. Between 1944 and 1951, American policymakers executed the blueprint with remarkable precision. At Bretton Woods, they established the dollar as the world's reserve currency. At San Francisco in 1945, they helped create the United Nations and ensured the Security Council structure gave the United States a permanent veto over any resolution it found inconvenient. The Marshall Plan pumped roughly $150 billion in today's dollars into rebuilding Western Europe, not purely out of generosity, but to create trading partners structurally bound to American economic leadership. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade wrote the rules of global commerce in ways that favored open markets, which favored American power, and wrapping around all of it, a network of security treaties that created something the world had never seen. A security umbrella, a system in which the United States guaranteed the military protection of dozens of nations in exchange for something that never appeared explicitly in any treaty document: political alignment, economic cooperation, and access. America didn't just win the Second World War, it used that victory as a franchise agreement, and it has been collecting royalties ever since. But the most important piece of the blueprint wasn't the alliances. It wasn't even the military, it was the dollar. Here is a fact that sounds abstract until it doesn't. Every time a Malaysian company buys oil from a Saudi producer, the transaction is conducted in US dollars. Two countries that have nothing to do with the United States, and Washington sits invisibly in the middle of that transaction because both parties need dollars to complete it. This is the reserve currency, the single most powerful geopolitical instrument ever created. After Bretton Woods, the dollar became the world's primary medium of international exchange. Countries needed dollars to buy oil. purchase commodities, service international debts, participate in the global financial system. Every country on Earth had a structural incentive to hold dollars in reserve, to maintain their relationship with American financial institutions. The entire world became, in a very specific sense, a customer of the United States Federal Reserve. Because the United States issues the reserve currency, it can run trade deficits that would destroy any other economy. It can borrow at lower interest rates than any competitor. It can fund its military and social programs by issuing debt the rest of the world is structurally compelled to buy. Economists call this exorbitant privilege, a phrase coined by a French finance minister in the 1960s who understood exactly what it meant and deeply resented it. But the dollar's power goes far beyond balance sheets. It is a weapon, a precision instrument of geopolitical coercion, deployable without a single soldier leaving American soil. When the United States imposes financial sanctions on Russia, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, it isn't just freezing American assets. It is cutting that country off from the entire dollar-based international financial system. No dollar transactions, no SWIFT access. The economic equivalent of placing a country in a sealed room and removing the oxygen. Russia discovered this in February 2022. Within days of the Ukraine invasion, approximately $300 billion of Russian foreign reserves, assets sitting in banks around the world, had been frozen. Not seized, just made inaccessible. By decisions made in Washington, executed through dollar-based finance, the ruble collapsed 40% in a week. Sanctions aren't a perfect weapon. Russia adapted. Iran has survived decades of them. The tool has limits. But understand this, the dollar system is a geopolitical control mechanism, and the United States has demonstrated repeatedly that it will use it. The question keeping finance ministers in Beijing, Moscow, and Riyadh awake at night isn't whether America will use this weapon. They know it will. The question is, how do you build a world where it can't reach you? They don't have a complete answer yet. There is a reason no serious military power has gone to war with the United States since 1953. It is not simply fear of American military capability. It is something more structural, more elegant, more difficult to escape. It is the alliance system. After World War II, the United States constructed the most extensive network of formal security commitments in human history. NATO bound Western Europe to American strategic leadership. The US-Japan Security Treaty transformed the country America had firebombed into rubble into its most important Asian partner. Then came South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Saudi Arabia, Israel, dozens of smaller states. Today, the United States has formal defense commitments to over 50 countries. More than half the world's GDP is produced by nations under the American security umbrella. The genius of these alliances is not that they protect America from attack. America faces no existential conventional threat. The genius is what they do to everyone else. They create a structural barrier to any competing bloc powerful enough to challenge American primacy. They give Washington military basing rights, intelligence sharing access, and diplomatic leverage in almost every strategically significant region on Earth. And they bind allied governments so tightly to American partnership that abandoning the relationship becomes, for most of them, politically suicidal. Germany hosts American military bases. Japan pays billions annually toward the cost of the US military presence on its soil. South Korea structures its entire national security strategy around the assumption of American intervention. These are sophisticated countries making rational calculations, and the calculation keeps coming out the same. The cost of the American relationship is lower than the cost of facing the world without it. This is hegemony at its most efficient, not empire by conquest, empire by architecture, and the system is not static. It is a living instrument. Russia's invasion of Ukraine didn't weaken NATO, it revitalized it. Sweden and Finland applied for membership within months. Germany announced a historic $100 billion rearmament program. The alliance didn't just hold, it grew. In the Pacific, AUKUS extended American undersea deterrence deeper into the Indo-Pacific. The Quad, The United States, Japan, Australia, and India evolved into a substantive strategic coordination mechanism. The blueprint adapts, it recruits new participants, it finds new configurations, because the alternatives have never coalesced into something more attractive. That hasn't stopped one country from trying very hard. The sophisticated version of power doesn't look like armies, it looks like a spreadsheet, an institutional charter, a committee nobody has heard of making a decision that alters the financial fate of entire nations. The United States built its dominance on controlling the institutions through which global decisions get made. The IMF, created at Bretton Woods, headquartered in Washington, has voting structures weighted toward the largest contributors, giving the United States an effective veto over any significant institutional change. When a developing country faces a debt crisis, it comes to the IMF, and the IMF arrives with conditions that reshape national economic policy and long-term development trajectories. SWIFT, the Belgian cooperative processing $5 trillion in financial transactions daily, became a geopolitical weapon when Russia was cut off in 2022. A Belgian cooperative, operating under pressure from Washington, brought one of the world's largest economies to its financial knees. American technology companies control the digital world. Google handles 90% of global internet searches. Meta connects over 3 billion people. Amazon Web Services underpins the digital infrastructure of governments and corporations across dozens of countries. This is not coincidence. The United States made a deliberate strategic decision to lead the global technology revolution, ensuring the Internet's fundamental architecture remained under frameworks keeping Washington's influence central. The result, the digital nervous system of the modern world runs through American infrastructure, American legal jurisdiction, American intelligence access, American sanctions authority. When the United States wants to pressure a government, it applies force through a dozen institutional levers simultaneously, in ways that are deniable, gradual, and devastatingly effective. Scholars call this structural power, not the power to compel, the power to set the terms within which everyone else must operate. And here is the uncomfortable truth at the center of this entire story. Much of this power is invisible. It doesn't announce itself. It simply exists in the wiring of the global financial system, in the architecture of digital infrastructure, operating continuously, automatically, whether Washington is paying attention or not. To dismantle it, you first have to build something that can replace it. One country has decided to try. In 2013, Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative. Western analysts largely dismissed it as an infrastructure program. China building roads and ports, generating goodwill and export markets. That analysis wasn't wrong. It was just incomplete. Because the Belt and Road Initiative is the most ambitious attempt since 1945 to construct an alternative geopolitical architecture, a parallel system, a rival blueprint. The logic follows the American model closely because it is consciously derived from it. Build infrastructure in strategically important countries, create dependency, generate political alignment, do it through economics rather than military occupation. By 2023, over 140 countries had signed Belt and Road agreements. Chinese state banks lent hundreds of billions across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. In places where American development finance was absent, China moved fast and asked fewer governance questions. In parallel, Beijing has been working to dismantle American institutional choke points. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization excludes American influence by design. BRICS has begun discussing trade in non-dollar currencies. China's CIPS payment system is a deliberate alternative to SWIFT. Huawei's global telecommunications build-out was an attempt to create a parallel digital architecture, where Chinese companies hold the position currently occupied by American firms. This is a serious, sustained challenge. It would be a mistake to dismiss it, but it has problems its architects haven't solved. The first is trust. The American system offered a rules-based framework where the rules were predictable and at least partially impartial. China's alternative has generated accusations of debt trap diplomacy, opaque lending terms, and poor labor standards. No country, not even Russia, has committed to fully abandoning the dollar system. The second is coalition. American architecture enrolled dozens of powerful, wealthy nations as active participants. China's alternative leans heavily on authoritarian governments and economically marginal states. India is not in China's bloc. The EU remains embedded in American frameworks. Japan and South Korea aren't leaving. China is building. The ambition is genuine. But the blueprint it is challenging was built by people who understood that the most durable form of power is not the kind that dominates. It's the kind that becomes necessary. And necessary is very hard to replace. There is one final layer to the American blueprint, the one most frequently underestimated. Joseph Nye called it soft power, the ability to attract rather than compel, to make other countries want what you want, not because you forced them, but because your values, your culture, your institutions became aspirational. American universities educate the elites of almost every country on earth. Children of Chinese Communist Party officials attend Harvard and Stanford. Future prime ministers from across the developing world earn degrees at American institutions and absorb, along with their diplomas, a set of assumptions about markets, governance, and individual rights that are, at their foundation, American assumptions. American popular culture saturates global consciousness in ways no empire in history has managed. The language of global business, science, technology, and diplomacy is English. The symbolic landscape of the modern world was manufactured in California and distributed globally before any serious competitor could build an alternative. This is the deepest layer of the blueprint, the layer running below institutions, below financial systems, below military alliances, the layer that shapes what people in other countries believe is possible, legitimate, and worth wanting. No rival power has come close to replicating it. The American geopolitical blueprint is not a conspiracy. It was never secret. The people who built it wrote books about it, testified before Congress about it. Dean Acheson, George Marshall, George Kennan. They understood exactly what they were constructing and why. They were building a world safe for American power and offering enough genuine benefits that other countries would choose to stay inside the system rather than challenge it. 80 years later, that calculation still holds. Not comfortably, not without friction, not without a China that has studied the blueprint carefully and is writing its own. But it holds. The dollar is still the world's reserve currency. NATO is larger than it was when the Cold War ended. The IMF, the World Bank, the WTO have survived every crisis. American universities still attract the world's best students. American technology companies still dominate global digital infrastructure. The architecture bends, it absorbs, it adapts, because it was not designed for a single enemy or a single era. It was designed for permanence. The unanswered question of the 21st century is not whether the blueprint is being challenged. It is. The question is whether the challenger has the time, the coalition, and the imagination to build something the world will choose to move into. Every order eventually yields to the next one. The British order gave way to the American order. The American order will give way to something else. The only question that matters, the one defining the next 50 years, is who writes the rules of what comes next, and whether Washington still has the discipline, the vision, and the will to be in that room when it happens. They built the last world. The question is whether they'll build the next one.